Hey, peace, everybody. Peace. I'm Johannes of Black Alliance for Peace, DC Citywide Alliance, and alongside Mimi, I will be co-facilitating this evening's webinar, Global Occupation from the DMV to Africa. Tonight's panelists include Sister Sheena, a member of the Black Alliance for Peace based in Prince George's County, Maryland. Sheena concentrates on issues of poor and working class African people and Black people, which are ignored by the Black leadership class locally, nationally, and internationally. She prominently expresses an unwavering commitment to rigorous political education, emphasizing its importance in the ongoing liberation struggles for African Black people everywhere. Bree Hemphill, a member of BAP DC, dedicated to the spirit of Black radical Pan-African tradition as a part of the larger fight against colonialism, domestically and abroad. Presence Santifa, a member of the Black Alliance for Peace and a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, committed to the struggle for liberation of Africans at home and abroad. Taylor C., a member of BAP Mid-Atlantic and BAP DC since 2022, as a co-coordinator of BAP DC's Citywide Alliance and member of the Mid-Atlantic Political Education Team. Taylor is working towards the goal of developing membership in Central Virginia and throughout the state. And Netfa Freeman, an organizer in Pan-African Community Action, PACA, and co-coordinator of the Black Alliance for Peace's Africa team, and is also a co-host and producer of the WPFW radio show, and podcast, Voices with Vision. NETFA has decades of experience working internationally with people's anti-imperialist movements from Cuba to Venezuela to Zimbabwe to Nicaragua and beyond. We convene this evening to clarify and expose the interconnected nature of global imperialism's war on colonized people. With insights in a roundtable featuring our BAP Mid-Atlantic panelists, we will discuss how pressing social and political conditions familiar to residents of DC, Maryland, and Virginia are symptoms of an imperialist agenda that affects us within the empire, similar to how it affects Africans on the continent. Colloquially, the DMV is used as a shorthand to describe the DC metropolitan area, including select counties of Northern Virginia and Central Maryland. This label misdirects folks in understanding the region in ways meaningful to organizing for material gains. Across the US, Black people live as representatives of an internal colony. The DMV is no different. From the perspective of the empire, our existence here is an inconvenient reality. Law enforcement and military are occupying forces who are tactically positioned in working class communities to quell challenges to social order, to quell challenges to the social order. But otherwise, they exist as a show of force to deter any challenge before it even begins. Reality is, DC, Maryland, and Virginia are not ruled only in the halls of power accessible by metro. Similar to the continent, the ruling elite use our countrysides and waterways to conduct business, propagate counter-revolutionary mythologies, and to station reserves and military excesses. Similar to the continent, the rulers can count on a class of Black misleaders satisfied with the conditions the majority of us have to exist in, as long as they get their just due. Nothing needs to fundamentally change because they assure us that the problem isn't what is being done, but who is doing it. Similar to the continent, our relationship to power is made as distant as possible as a strategy to ensure that our communities remain sites of extraction to the benefit of those who wield power against us. Tonight, we use a comprehensive regional outlook that contextualizes political struggles in the Mid-Atlantic as connected to a people-centered international struggle against forces of repression. Taxed without full voting representation nationally, predominantly Black communities in DC face ongoing disenfranchisement from city council and even the White House administration. In Baltimore, decades of redlining, segregation, and punitive policing have created a landscape where structural violence has become an everyday reality. In Maryland, more generally, plans to build the FBI's headquarters in PG County have sparked concerns over gentrification, displacement, and heightened surveillance. But the buffer class of Black misleaders supports it despite residents' worries. In Virginia, over 99 federal military installations and defense contractors surround communities, especially in Northern Virginia, Central Virginia, and Hampton Roads, home to 15 bases, including Naval Station Norfolk and the only 2 NATO commands in North America. On the continent, AFRICOM acts as an extension of US domestic imperialism by projecting military power in Africa. AFRICOM partners with elites to advance US interests and replicates abroad tactics used to control marginalized communities domestically. These efforts undermine the sovereignty of nations and reinforce globalist capitalist domination. Exploring developments specific to DC, Maryland, Virginia, Baltimore, and Africa, the analysis BAP Mid-Atlantic organizers will share serves as a reminder that yes, our collective struggles are rooted in a common enemy, an enemy that understands the borders between us as a tactical detail in their assault on our efforts to organize towards self-determination. But beyond this, tonight's engagement will help us to explore and understand that our struggles are rooted ontologically and practically. City to city, state to state, country to country, the occupations we face may feel different and our neighbors may seem different. But through understanding the patterns of global repression that empire so arrogantly reveals to us, through understanding our inherent interconnected struggles, regardless of where we call home, we will be able to build coherently against those most vested in our collective exploitation. And so without further ado, we have Sister Sheena to talk about Maryland.
Peace, comrades. So thank you for the wonderful centering and introduction. I'm Sister Sheena. I'm from PG County and I'm with BAT Baltimore. The reason I'm organizing in Baltimore is because I recognized early into my development that things that are wrong in Baltimore City are things that are also wrong in Prince George's County, to the extent that there's a strong Democratic base and misleadership issue that goes further than just the interconnected, like, political realm. It's this idea that we are sectioned off from each other politically because of the borders that are enforced by whoever put them there. Like, there's a reason I can't get to Baltimore fast, the same way people can't get to DC fast. They don't want this many poor people getting together quickly because we would be able to organize effectively. Currently, we have a interim county executive in PG County who is going to phase out because the former county executive is a Maryland senator. She represents us in the Senate. She filled Kamala Harris's empty seat, but just like Kamala Harris, she's a prosecutor. This is a prosecutor to power pipeline, no doubt. Former Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown, Attorney General. We've got the only Black governor in the entire country, Mr. Bronze Star, I love Law and Order and Wall Street, Wes Moore, who was literally not from Baltimore. He was born in Tacoma Park, which was technically PG County, but then it wasn't anymore. All of these people buy into each other, support each other. Wes Moore endorsed Angela Alsobrooks. Wes Moore opposed, the rich white man who was running against Angela Alsobrooks, which a lot of people thought was an unpopular decision. But Angela Alsobrooks was able to win Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Charles County. I believe she won Anne Arundel County. She has only been in PG County politically, but because Black girl magic and a first Black of her ilk, she was able to achieve what hadn't been achieved since Kamala Harris vacated that seat. It shows a dedication to propping themselves up. It takes a lot of connections to do that. And when I began by speaking that there's a reason that we cannot connect to each other, our enemies in misleadership are consolidating. They're able to reach out to each other. I was able to see the Prince George's County State's Attorney trot her way to Baltimore to chill with the Baltimore City State's Attorney to pass legislation that would target 10, 11, and 12-year-old Black children in organized crime. That bill was the juvenile reform law, which was signed into law May of last year by the first Black governor of the state of Maryland, Wes Moore. It's fascinating how all of these people working in legislature would have such strong stances about how to police anybody, especially when crime is trending downward. But Wes Moore, in an attempt to quell fears about the $3 billion deficit in the state of Maryland, spoke strongly in the State of the State address he gave earlier this year that one thing we were absolutely not going to do was lose any of our police jobs to fix that budget difference. And I found that fascinating because they have the lion's share of every budget that I can think of. With Maryland's over 140 law enforcement agencies, and we're right on the border of DC, which means those federal agencies are often on our streets as well. I saw an NSA police car like 3 weeks ago. You can see Metro PD. You can see the cops who don't even live where you live. I live in a county where other cops live because they don't want to live where they terrorize people. We have a bunch of cops who really work here but live in West Virginia. So the interconnectedness of all of these things is the occupation that we're facing, because our enemies understand that we are at war, and we must as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Sheena, and I think it's absolutely correct. Our enemies are organizing, and so it's important that we organize. Folks come from different angles on it, but to your point, there's a core group that understands us a certain way, and so we have to relate to them and relate to one another in a way that takes that into account. Moving on, we have Taylor, to brief us on what's going on in Virginia.
Peace, everyone. So I had to write a script because I am a certified yapper. So I'm gonna start from here, and if I have any additional points, then I will speak to them later on in the webinar. So again, my name is Tay. I am a co-coordinator of BAP DC, and I'm also a member of All African People's Revolutionary Party. And I am going to be sharing a very brief glimpse into Virginia's role in enacting US global and domestic imperialism. And when you talk about Virginia, you cannot skip over, and again, it's called the so-called Commonwealth of Virginia, although this wealth is definitely not shared, without mentioning the shared history between people indigenous to this land and Africans who experienced and fought against genocidal campaigns of enslavement, mass murder, removal, and land theft, mainly by the English here. Since its inception, Virginia was a business venture grounded in the goal of taking land and resources to the benefit of the ruling class, so that'd be slaveholders, landholders, or as they call them in our textbooks, planters and farmers, investors, and government officials. And sometimes they were all three. Look at George Washington and his family, and all of the so-called first families of Virginia. And they also used forced labor, both indigenous and African forced labor, for economic gain. And I can go on forever about how history echoes loudly in the disparities today, but that's for future events. So there are over 1.6 million African Americans living in Virginia, including about 124,000 Africans who have immigrated from the continent and throughout the diaspora. And we make up 20% of the population. We also make up 43% of people incarcerated in jails and 53% of people in prison. 21% of youth ages 15, 17 are African, yet they make up 72% of teens who are sent to custody of the Department of Juvenile Justice. Almost a quarter of Black youth in Virginia live in poverty. There are 1.1 million immigrants in Virginia, making up just over 13% of the state's population, with a majority living in Northern Virginia. And I wanted to give context in relation to our carceral system. So a little information about this is, so people in Virginia are convicted of felonies, permanently lose their civil rights, including the right to vote, and must appeal directly to the governor for restoration of rights. Since governors cannot serve concurrent terms, Virginians live at the whims of each administration, and we live at the whim of legislators who can serve up to 12 years in office. Virginia legislature passed a law in 2020 allowing principals to decide when to alert police if students committed a possible misdemeanor. And I used to work in the schools, and they were very eager to do so. Governor Youngkin wanted to put a SRO, a school resource officer, in every school. Stemming from a 1996 law, shout out to Erica for pointing out that we need to study the 90s, enacted by the Clinton administration, current Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin directed local and state law enforcement agencies, including the Department of Corrections, to cooperate and collaborate with ICE. Since the signing of the executive order this February, over 900 individuals have been identified, incarcerated individuals have been identified for a 48-hour extended hold. And as of May 21st, just this week, Youngkin claims that over 1,000 people have been detained by ICE. Since May 1997, state and local law enforcement agencies have spent almost $20 million purchasing excess military equipment through the 1033 program, particularly in rural areas, which happen to have the highest incarceration rates in the state. And so for here, we're gonna look at Northern Virginia, which is part of the DMV, because the DMV, it's very contentious. It's the rest of Virginia below like Quantico, Fredericksburg, that is not the DMV. But we're also going to look at Central Virginia and then step over into Hampton Roads to get an overview into how those of us in the African diaspora and immigrants, working people are criminalized and indoctrinated. I'm gonna be really brief because I have a minute left. So in Northern Virginia, you'll see that former majority Black villages, neighborhoods were paved over for projects such as the Pentagon in East Arlington and Queen City, or Dulles Airport. Please look into Dulles Airport. It was built right on top of a village called Willard. And this pattern continues today, incentivized by tax breaks, state government funding, ever-changing zoning laws, federal government agencies, private military contractors, and commercial and residential developers drastically inflate the cost of living for working class residents who are priced out of their communities and pushed further south into Virginia or seek refuge in Maryland. Northern Virginia has 93 data centers and counting spread out across the region, and more continue to sprout up as companies compete for land. And I do want to come to the point, Amazon is supporting Israel by providing cloud services, which have material consequences for Northern Virginia communities, home again to 93 data centers, which take up 25% of the electricity use in the state. And for now, I'm going to jump over Central Virginia, but I do just want to speak to Hampton Roads, which is essentially a military base. That entire area, so the 757 is a military base, and Naval Station Norfolk has a 4,600 acre base and houses over 600,000 active duty military members. So I will hopefully speak more again, and please ask questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Tay. Thank you for highlighting some of the histories there, and then connecting it to big tech as well as other struggles going on in the globe. So we're going to move on to Presence, who's going to tell us about what's going on in Baltimore.
Peace, what's up, y'all? I just want to say thank you so much for Taylor's and Sister Cian's analysis that's come so far. My name is Presence. I'm a member of Black Alliance for Peace Baltimore, and I'm a member of the All Africans People's Revolutionary Party. So in Baltimore City, we see the conditions manifest as an internal colony, as we see in many other places in America. So how this manifests is, one way we see is redlining. We were one of the first places to have redlining in 1910, which was the stopping of federal funding and other resources from coming into our communities. In these places, we see mass divestment, segregation, economic domination, poor health conditions, and mass imprisonment. It's important to understand that the conditions that we see as a colonizer-colonized relationship is that we have been in an extractive relationship since our beginnings in America. That could look like slavery, that could look like sharecropping, and presently today it looks like us making up the mass of low-wage workers. The biggest institutions in Baltimore City, such as Johns Hopkins University and the University of Maryland, employ many Africans for low wage and they don't have access to that same education, healthcare themselves. In Baltimore City, these mass underdevelopment is taken care of and dealt by and enforced by the police. Mass policing is used in order to keep us in our conditions of exploitation and underdevelopment. We are continuously treated as disposable and expendable in Baltimore City, and we have continuously resisted that. We have resisted that decade over decade, year after year, and in order to keep us in our position and to stop that resistance, mass policing has been used in order to perpetuate our conditions. Mass policing and militarization in Baltimore City manifest in the 1033 program, where state and local police has access to excess military weapons, such as M16 rifles, M14 rifles, armored vehicles, and high surveillance, which local and state police may say this is being used for tomorrow's threat, but time after time, tomorrow's threat has been us. We have been the ones at the hands and at the subject of these weapons. We also see things such as relentless pursuit. In 2020, Donald Trump selected Baltimore as one of several other cities to get a surge of federal funding in order to deal with the massive crime we see in Baltimore City. We also see things such as the daily exchange program in Baltimore City, which trains Baltimore police with Israeli police. And we understand what's going on in Israel, and we understand what's going on in Palestine and Gaza with the genocide going on, and they're training with these genocidaires. We understand that these tactics and these weapons are being not used for a threat that's made up, but is being used against us. So it's also important to understand that in one of our campaigns at the end of 1033 program, we see schools such as Coppin and Morgan State University having access and receiving these military grade style weapons as well, such as shotguns and M16 rifles. It's also important for me to point out that we have currently a cop city emerging. It's been emerging since 2013, which is proposed to be on Coppin State University's campus. And on this Cop City is a tactical village in which they can train in simulations similar to what we see in Baltimore City. We also see a $1 billion jail being built. And these things are important to point out because they are proposed as things that will help the police, help their training, help the community, and build jobs. But in reality, these things do not help the community. They serve to keep us in our position. Why would we build a $1 billion jail and a cop city with a tactical village when that money which would be over $1.5 billion can be shifted into the community to help some of these same conditions that we see developed from being in this internal colony, from being in these poor conditions. We also see massive money being allocated to the police. Over 2024, over $539.1 million were allocated to the police budget. And not only that, we see police getting paid over twice their base salary in bonuses and overtime, while we see teachers constantly underfunded in our community. Other places such as we need more counselors, we need more rec centers, which is continually split out. We have communities that see over 20% unemployment. Well, they say we need more policing, we need more military equipment. These are the contradictions that show that these resources are not being used to help and serve us, but these resources are being used directly against us. And this is important to understand as we have seen uprisings in 2020, we have seen uprisings in 2015, 2013 for these massive police brutalities for our conditions. And the police understand that we are resisting. And we need to understand that the police mounting more military supplies, more resources indicates the position that we are in. As Sister Cena said earlier, we are in a state of war, and the police understand that. The police know that, and it's important for us to understand that the place that we find ourselves in. And I yield there.
No, I appreciate your presence. You were spitting absolutely in the 1033 program, and thank you for so explicitly naming internal colonialism and drawing some of those connections so explicitly about our institutions of higher education and policing in our communities. We're going to move on to Bree, who's going to tell us about the conditions in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Johannes. So I think it might seem really obvious, the connection between militarization or international domestic repression and the District of Columbia because of our proximity to the White House and all those other colonial institutions. But I'm still going to talk about it because that's what I was here to do. So two things that I really want to touch on in talking about DC. One of them is the current executive orders that are have been talked about a lot in the District of Columbia. One of them being Executive Order 14252, the Safe and Beautiful Executive Order that was being led by Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller, I think his last name is. And the reason I want to talk about this is because this is part of a tradition of not only increased militarized policing in DC, but criminalization in a way that disproportionately affects the African working class and poor residents of the District of Columbia. So what we understand about the Safe and Beautiful executive order is that we are not the people that are trying to make the city safe and beautiful for. They're trying to make it safe and beautiful for students, for diplomats, for their kids, for the wealthy, for all the people that come to DC, extract from the poor working class, and then leave out to the suburbs of Maryland or wherever else they came from in order for them to feel comfortable in the District of Columbia over the actual safety and security and physical safety of the residents of the District of Columbia. So part of this is things like accelerated concealed carry permits and increased resources to ICE and deploying federal law enforcement for misdemeanors like public intoxication, fare evasion, traffic violations, an increase in officers, an increase in the presence of federal officers. And all of those things we understand, as my comrades have already said, to be war, because we understand that we are the combatants that they are trying to militarily oppose. So when we're talking about things like concealed carry, we understand that in the legacy of slave patrols and deputizing white citizens to racially control the population of the District of Columbia. We understand that the concealed carry weapons are part of a legacy that includes the Metro General talking about them actively trying to recruit citizens to enforce fare evasion. And how ridiculous that is. We already have increased cops in the metro centers because of this threat of fare evasion. They've said that crime is down 65%. And now they're having talks about having citizens confront people for fare evasion. And who are the people that are usually jumping the fare in the District of Columbia? Those are usually our people, and it's not an issue of safety, it's an issue of poverty. If people can afford the changing fare prices because there's different fares for different places that you're going, because if you're going across the city, you might have to take 2 trains and 2 buses, and you might not be able to pay, however much both ways to get to where you got to go. Now there's the possibility of citizens being deputized to confront you because you didn't pay $2 to get into the metro at Gallery Place. And we understand that in the legacy of other executive orders, like the Strengthening and Unleashing America's Law Enforcement Executive Order 14288, which includes legal defense for police officers. So when they are accused of excessive force, which in the District of Columbia is also disproportionately against African working class people. And we have a lot of African police officers, and we have stats that say African police officers are the ones that are also disproportionately using force against African people in DC. So when we have the executive order that is proposing more money for legal defense for police officers and more money for cops in prisons, but also in an increase in the distribution of military grade equipment to law enforcement, including surveillance technology, tactical vehicles, and weapons. So my comment talked about that 1033 program, and this executive order would also include an increase in expansion of the exchange between the military and their weapons and the police. We understand the military is being interwoven within the fabric of DC because we know that the University of Maryland, College Park is the most militarized university in the country. There's a list of militarized universities, and UMD College Park is #1, and 17 of that top, I think, 100 are in Maryland and DC. So on that list are also George Washington University, which is at #4, Georgetown is at #10, American is #20, Hopkins, which is in Maryland, is #7, but they do have a DC campus. In Nova, George Mason is #5. So we know that's not only mean the increase of ROTC on those campuses, but also University of Maryland is the top recruiting university for defense contractors like Lockheed Martin. So we understand the interwoven nature of the university, the government, the federal government, militarization, and policing in the District of Columbia, and how that pans out within not only the borders of DC, but bleeding into the surrounding counties. So I think that what's important about the talk about internal colonialism is that part of the colonial apparatus is the deputization of citizens to keep racial order. It is in surveillance. We have an insane system of surveillance in DC. We have ads on the metro for Department of Defense contractors. We have every inch of DC policed by a different agency between Park Police, DC Metropolitan Police, Transit Police, Amtrak Police. We have so many different policing apparatuses in DC. And I will yield there, and we'll talk more about it later.
No, thank you so much, Bree. That was wonderful, and thank you for speaking to, the implications of being surrounded by such indoctrinating material. And obviously, there's implications that aren't just inferential, where it concerns the presence of occupying forces. But we will continue to get to that as we speak through the evening. Moving on to Netfa Freeman, who will be talking to us about some of the developments on the continent.
Thank you. Johannes, I thought we were on first name basis, bro. You don't have to do my whole full name. You can just say my first name. I'm not going to take up too much time expressing how honored I am and proud I am to be on this panel with all y'all young people doing this, dropping some knowledge and doing some fantastic work. But I am, so get right into it. I think one of the things, and I'm here to talk about, I guess, this connection to Africa and African liberation and what the U.S. does in particular that leads to NATO. Hold on a second. Give me 1 second. I got to time myself too. This Western this Western imperialist project, and so the U.S. enjoys how do we say an obfuscation in the sense that Africans who were brought here and colonized, brought here in the bowels of under settler colonialism, brought here to be enslaved, or have been hoodwinked to believe that we are of this country, and that we're not connected to Africa, that we're not Africans, and that our liberation is not tied to Africa. By the same token, on the continent of Africa, the U.S. has enjoyed a false notion that they were not the colonizers. They're not a colonizer, African continent. They never formally colonized like France and Britain and all of that. But we know they're the top neo-colonizer right now on the African continent, probably the top neo-colonizer all around the world. One of the main things that I don't have to get into much detail in that you all have how we laid out was the main one of the main features of their domination is militarization, and we all know in the Black Alliance for Peace about AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command, that has proliferated and dominated the continent of Africa through militarism and military bases and military to military relationships. And I think that what I want to talk about now is the fact that despite all the things we can outline about their strength and what they do, they're losing. We are winning, and we need to understand that we have some advantages that we have to take. At this moment. One of the things that's actually coming up is African Liberation Day, is coming up, and Memorial Day also. Memorial Day really being its origins being an honoring of those who fought against the Confederacy and against the enslavement, and those soldiers who died. And now that over time they've been able to appropriate that, remake it, and make it about everyone who fights for this country, the settler colonial. But we need to recapture that. We need to make it back, take things back, and honor those who fought and died for African people everywhere. So it's ideological hijacking. The biggest expression of African Liberation Day outside of Africa was in Washington, D.C. And people would, those who've been around know about those days, and they had to circumvent and deteriorate African Liberation Day as an assault on our psyche, and to kind of reverse and break the ideological connections that were natural for us who are struggling against settler colonialism and struggling for a liberated Africa. What's happening in Africa today affords us an opportunity to raise the level of consciousness of those who are captive in the bowels of the U.S. settler colonialism. There's a lot going on that we all, I won't say we all know, but many of us know, and we should know about the fanfare, given the fanfare they're making about Burkina Faso, about the alliance of Sahel states. We should see these takeovers, even if they're led by the military, because they're led by the military, as synonymous with our liberation struggles in the United States, armed struggle, whether it be the Black Panther Party or the Deacons of Defense or whatever, whoever sees it fit to understand that we have to be ready to defend ourselves and fight physically for our liberation. Today, there was, I'm running out of time already. That seems like this, that we want to talk about this. What's the people in Ivory Coast are neighboring Burkina Faso are on fire. They're about to take over, and there was said to be a military coup. It's unclear whether it is or not. But given the conditions and given its proximity to Burkina Faso and Niger and Mali, if that's happened, how that will unfold and what will happen with that would be a victory for us. And we also, there's a lot of talk about Ramaphosa meeting with Donald Trump and how Trump offended us because of how he treated Ramaphosa. we should be clear that, and it was given in the rest of the presentations, that that one of the strongholds and the weaknesses really of the enemy is the comprador class. Ramaphosa, really should be what should offend us, coming to the enemy and begging for concessions. The same thing in Ouattara, Alassane Ouattara, and how the role that class is playing to weaken Burkina Faso. So right now, we are in a good position, and I think right now we should study Africa, understanding and being able to see how do we connect with the liberation struggles on the continent of Africa and use what they're doing now to uplift the consciousness of our people. We have an opportunity to reverse the ideological assault on our people, because there's something of pride that they can look forward to, and radical militantism. I got to be careful. You got to be careful what you're saying these days, that we should use to our advantage. We're Africans, and that a liberated Africa is what's even going to benefit the conditions we face here and anywhere else we are in the world.
Thank you, Netfa. So we're going to keep it pushing. We're going to keep it rolling through it to our roundtable talk, in which we will ask some of our panelists questions that'll help take all the excellent information that they just provided and the crystal clear analysis that they just provided, and put it in conversation with one another, so that we can understand the region more comprehensively and further understand our struggle. So Mimi will be taking over this portion of the evening. So without further ado.
Hi, everyone. My name's Mimi. I'm a member of Black Alliance for Peace, DC, and we're going to be chatting in this roundtable about the concepts that our incredible panelists, my incredible comrades, just laid out for us. We talked about the Western imperialist project that is taking place globally. We talked about that in Maryland, Virginia, DC, Baltimore, and Netfa just talked about Africa. So I want to get into this first question. And again, not every panelist has to answer every question, but I would love to hear from all of you. So thinking about the concept that Presence really laid out about internal colonies. So how are internal colonies in African neighborhoods in Baltimore and the DMV, as well as African nations, both treated as sacrifice zones for imperial profit, with Black political elites and AFRICOM-backed regimes serving specifically as the Black misleadership class?
I'll start with this question. Just to bring up, in understand internal colonialism, as I repeat, it's important to understand that Africans are not only the basis of labor, but we are also treated as disposable and expendable. We clearly see this in South Baltimore. If you're from Baltimore, you understand how much waste and how much pollution is in South Baltimore neighborhoods such as Curtis Bay. Specifically, we see like Cherry Hill, Brooklyn. We see the CXS coal plant. We understand that another thing is that we see the largest medical waste facilities in the country in Baltimore City, specifically in South Baltimore. These are why we see conditions such as high rates of cancer in Baltimore City. In Baltimore City, we have one of the highest rates of dementia in the country, and this is we see this is more seen in the Black community than anywhere else, than any other community in Baltimore City. This looks like very poor air quality for Baltimore City residents. This looks like another way that we see the sacrifice zones is that Africans are sacrificed to capital by neighborhoods not being routinely updated. This is seen with lead paint in buildings. Any building that has not been updated since 1970 has lead paint in the walls. And we understand routinely that these neighborhoods are not updated. Many houses are left to rot and not left to maintenance, which is poisoning our community. So it's clear that with not only these places such as incinerators and other factories being placed in African communities, the fact that African communities are not routinely taken care of also plays into the reason why we see these sacrifice zones in Baltimore City.
Thank you for that, Presence. Anybody else want to touch on this question? Tay?
Yeah, I want to also link what's going on in Maryland and Virginia together. So with the data centers, and somebody put in the chat that there are over 200 data centers in Northern Virginia. So I stand corrected, and I believe it. And some of these data centers are housed within other businesses. So they might not, zoning laws are, I'm learning a lot because my area is becoming like another data center alley. So I'm learning a lot about how zoning laws are being like misapplied and reapplied. Standards are being changed just to put in these environmental hazards. And to connect with what Presence was saying, there are, I just pulled up the article so I can make sure I quoted it correctly, but Maryland is going to be hit with an $800 million energy bill due to the power that Virginia data centers need. So they're using up 25% of the state's power. And then they're also pulling in power from Maryland. If Maryland is being hit, the state of Maryland is being hit with this bill, then the people are going to catch it. And so I just, when Princess was just speaking about the disparities, it's going to be going over, I mean, it's going to hit farmland, but it's not just going to hit farmland. It's going to go over people's homes in the suburbs and in the cities as well. And yeah, I yield there.
No,
I guess I'll add. Ooh, you gonna go?
his hands up,
Oh, but
and then you, sister.
No, go ahead, Sheena.
Maryland is trying to get energy centers because, of course, Westmore wants to do that for the state, claiming that it'll create jobs. I know of at least 2 locations. I live in one of them, and my sister lives in another. So the scheme of it is creating these, waste centers and saying we can dump these off on these areas because who's really out there? Having no idea of the implications that it's going, like, there's flooding, there's a lot of deforestation out here. We were literally breathing ash like a year ago, and everybody seems to forget that. And wanting to put these massive wastes of energy and attractors of heat is already bad in an area where we have so many unexplained fires and old buildings, incinerating themselves, which are always prime locations for development. So it just seems like these are the perfect storm of opportunity for the people that they're trying to attract, which was mentioned earlier. They're trying to widen up populations. What better way than to force people out through things beyond their control or grab things up through eminent domain, because the economy of the state would benefit from a few of these things that are controlled by the ruling class and the misleadership to amass profit.
And then, because I like what everybody's saying, for the capitalists and the imperialists of the world, our lives have always been secondary to their interest, and the primary motive of them is profit. And so that's always been the case. And as people are talking about now, things like the environmental destructions that impact people are taking on the same form in Africa: deforestation and all this kind of stuff from climate change. In addition, in different extractive industries and how they hurt the environment, and the fact that our people are laboring in these industries. Our labor, I mean, you got children working in mines and all kind of stuff under incredibly horrendous conditions and life-threatening conditions. And then one of the interesting things that I thought of is, particularly when prisons first started, was the parallel between how our lives are expendable based on the police, and how they will just kill us and will tell us in both instances on Africa, their role in Africa and the role in the US, is that they're deploying these forces in the best interest of the community, in the best interest of us, sending the cops in because of crime and whatnot, and the othering those of us who are, involved in some other, or just displaced in terms of the community, or ostracized in the community, to kill them. And the same thing with AFRICOM and these, to the extent that there is some legitimacy to the elements being in our community, but there are people acting in ways that are destructive to us. They come and they create the conditions for this, and then come and send in the troops to call so-called get it in line, and in the process of their so-called getting in line, they are killing us, you know. So
Yes. Thank you for that, Netfa. Black land and labor is exploited in order for the US to sustain its mission of imperialism and extraction. And so moving to the continent, this question's for Netfa, but also for all of the incredible panelists. What is a liberated zone? Can you speak to the Zone of Peace campaign, which is a major BAP campaign, an important model for colonized people in the region of the DMV? Why is that important for us to understand the meaning of a liberated zone? And what are some parallels between the Zone of Peace campaign and Shutdown AFRICOM campaign?
So, you know, a liberated zone, if we are referring to it, I look to the zone theory that Kwame Nkrumah came up with in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, and saying that, at least on the continent, and I think it's true wherever we are, if the question is being a question of power, and how do we exercise and attain power over the territories, at least in the areas that we're in. And so he broke down the zone theory. So broke it down into 3 different types of zones or territories, and one would be the enemy held zones, where the enemy of, you know, has complete control, political and economic control over the territory, and then a contested zone where our liberation forces are struggling and fighting and able to, you know, create, you know, destabilize the activities in the interest of the enemy, and they're contesting for power. And a liberated zone is where we have been able to attain some level of complete, or actually complete, control over a territory, and that has to be defined into, you know, more like political, economic, and all that. But it also we have to deal with state power. You know, being able to attain the state power based on what how we define the state. That's why, you know, it's kind of, people are arguing whether the Alliance of Sahel states constitute a liberated zone. My position, because some of it's in question because of the vast parts of the territory that are not in their control. Like in Burkina Faso, they're saying most of the Tuareg rebels and whatnot, call them rebels, have a lot of the control. But the point is, they do have some territory, and they're completely under that control, and they have a working kind of a state apparatus that's a liberated zone, even if they don't have the territory that was carved out by the colonial powers, complete control of that. And so how that's related to the first of the U.S. out of Africa campaign, BAP's U.S. out of Africa campaign, U.S. out of Africa shut down AFRICOM, and the fact that we want a peace, that, in other words, is the absence of all these things that imperialism wrought on us, that is not a peaceful situation. It's not just the fact that there's war and contention, but we want peace. We want the self-determination. We want to be able to, you know, form the governments and have that we want, and the apparatuses that will. Then one of the things that we have to do is get AFRICOM out. That's just one. And that we've also defined and developed the campaign to not just be about AFRICOM and shut down AFRICOM and get the U.S. military out, but all forms of U.S. intervention and Western intervention, but all forms of intervention and destabilization, like sanctions and all of that. And so as BAP defines peace as I don't know that, you know, I remember that we have actually a pretty precise definition, and I'm not going to be able to give it. I'm going to paraphrase it, that the ability to attain peace through the popular struggle of the people, free from all the interlocking forces of imperialism and capitalism and war and all of that, then that's one of the first things that we have to do is, you know, not one of the first things, but it's something we have to do, is shut down AFRICOM, U.S. out of Africa, because we're, you know, we also are uniquely positioned by being in the U.S. and making connections with our people on the continent to do this. And you asked me how it's related to the zone of peace. Is that what you said? Well, I think maybe I said it's kind of evident, because the zone of peace, and the zone of peace was a concept that was developed by the community of Latin American Caribbean states in 2014 in Havana, Cuba. The states, you know, came together to create CELAC, that community, which is an alternative to the OAS, the Organization of African Unity, and they called for a zone of peace in the Americas. BAP has emerged to create the civil society popular component of that call for a zone of peace. There is a CLAC social, which is not the states, but we're trying to, work on that zone of peace in terms of demilitarizing and de-imperialist or anti-imperialist movement in the Americas, and that the counterpart should be or a counterpart for that would be the zone of U.S. out of Africa shut down AFRICOM campaign, looking at the hemispheres and trying to struggle for this this condition in these two places in the world. Does that answer that? I hope I answered.
Yes, it does, Nefa. More than answers it. So thank you. I wanted to move on to a few of the audience questions that we have, and I think I can combine them together. So it's two different questions, but they're focused on how we, as rank and file organization members, first should strive to take on efforts to fight back against the growing, multiplying, diverse forms of militarization that are taking place in our communities. So how can we fight back against them? And then also, what have been ways that have been successful where African people have countered in the United States this militarized global occupation? So leaning on the past, what are some examples that y'all as panelists can name, and what can people on the call today, besides joining an org, what can they do? Bree?
Well, I can do my best to answer that question, but I think that what has been, as far as some of the militarization that we've been seeing, I found that a lot of people, although they are scared as conditions, as their conditions worsen and as contradictions arise and as the appearance of crime via the news or whatever has people afraid, I have found that people do largely understand what does and does not make themselves safe. So I would say that as far as what we could do, just like rank and file members as an organization, besides, as you said, joining joining an organization that's actually fighting for these things in an organized manner and kind of heightening the contradictions around the concept of safety and how ridiculous it is to both applaud lowering crime rates, but also saying we need more money for police, and seeing how kind of ridiculous that is as a concept, and thinking for ourselves, okay, what is it that we actually need as the African community in this place? What is it that we would actually need to happen to be safe? One of them being, as my comrade said, the destruction of both AFRICOM and CARICOM and US militarization globally, and fighting for that alongside our comrades in the Africa team and the BAP Haiti Americas team, because there's no way to ensure any of our safety if our African brothers and sisters elsewhere are not safe. On a day-to-day basis, we can oppose anywhere that the introduction of increased militarization is being suggested. So we've seen students that have been fighting against defense contractors being on the universities at like job fairs and career fairs, and having them fighting for them to be removed or for them to be not included in those. People fighting against the militarized intervention of the US and other places, fighting against militarized intervention into places like Haiti, and fighting against cop cities. We've seen a presence in places where they're planning on building cop cities, and like a very strong dissent with physical as well as verbal dissent of saying we don't want this, but also physically showing up to say we don't want this to be here. And I'll let some of my other comrades kind of answer to like historical things that have worked here in this place. I'll yield.
As the elder, Netfa, do you have something to say?
Well, I mean, there's some old campaigns that used to be like, is there such thing as ROTC anymore? Is that still a thing? Okay. So we used to do the, Rashid messing with me in the chat. So we used to do we had campaigns around get ROTC off campus and those type of things. I think right now, We need to bring back some of those camps. If they probably, I don't know, they probably exist, but we can use them to raise the consciousness of our people. And because of what's happening on the African continent with AFRICOM and the existence of all that, it makes it fertile ground for us to use these things, and to build on these things. There, a lot of the, like Bree mentioned, a lot of students, there is some understanding and awareness of the the unjust nature of these things, but it may not be as completely conscious as it is. But it gives us, in terms of it being, it's an injustice, it's a campaign, let's get them off, as opposed to also extending going to the logical conclusion that our liberation struggle must go to, and that's defeating capitalism, defeating imperialism and whatnot, and tying it in, defeating this notion of Americanism. It's an ideological affront. We are victims of Americanism, as Malcolm told us, and that this is, and so we have to use every opportunity to raise up the contradictions between, or the parallels even between, what's happening in Palestine to what's happened to the indigenous people of this, and kind of defeat this notion, the oxymoron of African American, because that's exactly what it is. You can't have the policies that you have on the African continent and around African world, and us really also identify with this nation and its interest in its politics and culture and whatnot. So it's an oxymoron. They've created fertile ground for us to beat back these delusions that our people are operating under, and when we beat back the delusions, we can also bring people into the fold of action, decisive action.
Yes. Tay?
I think this also speaks to another question that may come up, but I was in a JRTC program in high school, and it, like, I'm in my 30s now, and it still has an impact on my life. So pardon my French. I was in ROTC, I think in 8th grade, they came over. So my high school and my middle school were very close together. So they came over and they did an exhibition routine, spinning rifles. They had their swords, they're marching. It was just, I mean, it captivated me. And that was what captured me. The exhibition. It wasn't the, I don't know, like the whole military aspect of it. It was the fun part of it, so called. So every weekend I was on a trip. I was an officer from freshman year. Like, they had me in it, and I wanted to go into the Navy. Our two instructors pointed out me and my best friend specifically to, was like, oh, have y'all thought about going to the military? You remind me of two Marines that have graduated from here, two twins. Then in 11th grade, I had a mental health crisis, and I came back to school. And that very day, after leading instruction, they called me a bitch. All of that hard work, all these trophies, all of this stuff. Like, to this day, I was a middle school counselor, so I would tell my students straight up, do not do ROTC. And if you do, you need to go in with the understanding that you're going to get that scholarship at the in your senior year, and go on about your business. Do, like, have I tried to teach them to the best of my ability to have an analysis. So like ROTC is pushed heavily. The instructor would constantly come over, and this happens in many schools. So think about Hampton Roads, for example. Hampton Roads has a majority Black population. So that includes, like, Portsmouth is 51%, Hampton 49%, Suffolk, and they all have high school JRTC programs. They have ROTC programs at their colleges, including the HBCUs like Hampton, Norfolk State, even up to like Virginia State. They have, and so, sorry. And my point I wanted to come back to as well is, because it's such a militarized zone, they're in the elementary school, as somebody pointed out, K through 12 at career day. Who were counselors calling? Because I was a counselor. We're calling everybody that's in the local area. And who are the businesses in the Hampton Roads area? Defense contractors, what did I put? Like shipbuilding, everything in support of the military. And so when kids are looking at careers, they're looking to the military. If their parents are in the military, they follow that line. And I also wanted to point out the USS Harry Truman is stationed in Norfolk at the naval station. So just the thought of $60 million planes falling off of this ship and kids are hungry back where it's based, like, that should piss you off. And these are like kind of the contradictions we could raise. And again, I think I read that one of the ships, like Michael Langley, had pushed out to go to like the Middle East, Africa. So when you I know Wikipedia is not a good source, but if you click on Wikipedia, you can see where these like ships are based, and just think about the population that lives there and who are suffering. And I do want to also point out the private real estate developers have contracts with the military, and not only are they screwing over the civilians, but also they have substandard housing for military members and their families. So all of this, all connected.
Yeah, to add on to that, I just wanted to speak on why we see how we see another way militarization manifests is with HBCUs. A lot of ways that HBCUs get their funding and resources is through buying for these military contracts. We see places such as Howard, really pushing heavily for these contracts. Some of them are upwards of millions of dollars. We just saw Howard got one recently for I think for one for air defense. And we also, and this is important to point out because the way we see this militarization occurring out is the same way why we see people such as William Ward, who went to Morgan State University, being the head, one of the heads of AFRICOM. And it's important to understand, like, this militarization is being embedded into our community. And I think to speak on, one of how we see us winning in the past is by being solid with our demands. When we understand what we're demanding and we're pushing for that, that's oftentimes when we see the most change. And at Black Alliance for Peace, we understand our campaign of no compromise, no retreat, and we stick to a lot of our campaigns, such as abolishing the Department of Defense 1033 program, stop the Israeli training of the U.S. police forces, shut down AFRICOM, close down the 800 U.S. foreign military bases. And we stick to those demands because we understand that these are the things that are causing the damage in our community. These are the things that are being used to oppress and repress us. And in raising that consciousness, we can get people to understand why we are doing these things. What are we pushing for specifically? For example, exposing and abolishing NATO, reducing the military budget. We need to stick to these things in order for us to have specific things that we are trying to push out. So we're not sitting here misunderstanding and confused about what's going on. So when we're clear about that, it's easy to see what our victories are, what our wins are. When people are clear about what they're pushing for, that's when real change is made.
Say that, presence. Yes. We need clarity, and that clarity gives us a path and a path to work together to bring this empire down. So bringing us to our last question, we might have time for another one, depending on how well the panelists behave. But this last question, I think, is really interesting because it gets to what is at the core of who we are fighting for. Black Alliance for Peace is for poor and working class Africans here and around the world. So the DMV boasts a visible Black professional class. So we have this Black professional class, yet wealth gaps between them and poor Black residents are among the nation's worst. How does this fabricated Black middle class operate as a buffer, absorbing dissent while obscuring the state's abandonment, neglect, and war against the Black working poor?
Oh, I had my hand up for something different, but I can definitely take this. As I said earlier, I'm from PG County, Maryland. I don't say that with pride. I say that because I was born here. The myth of the median income of everybody here. I got into a dispute with Wallop Legay. She is now on the county council in PG County, I believe. She said the median income is $80,000 a year. I was just like, that must just be for people ma'am. She wasn't an elected official at the time, but she is now because she was towing that line. She tried to eat me up about Bowie, but that's not what it's like in Temple Hills. That's not what it's like in parts of, it's the Heights. So it's District Heights, it's Fairmont Heights, and it's Capitol Heights. It's not like that in Eastern Shore. It's not like that in parts of Montgomery County. It's not like that in Langley Park at all. I know because I grew up there. It's not like that in Tacoma Park, in areas, those places that I was talking about being primed for development are those places where people haven't been pushed out yet. Speaking about push out, People who got pushed out of DC got pushed into those poorer parts of PG. People who don't want to be around poor people in PG are moving to Charles County because they want to be the hub for the Black middle class, the wealthy Black county that gets the prominence. They don't really have juice like that. I mean, you got Waldorf, but I mean, it's a hike. But it's to separate themselves because, once again, not accessible to the masses. You're going to have to take some ways to get back into these metro areas where they're concentrating themselves, because that's where they're consolidating and building power. They want you to work in DC, so they're using the military and the police to chase you out so that they feel safe while you're surrounded by dilapidation, underdevelopment, and no opportunity to improve your life. So no compromise, no retreat is definitely a pushback, not just against the mechanisms of, the defenders of capitalism, but it's by their masters and the people who order them to send the hit. We're against all of those people. The same way Bowser painted the streets while they were maiming people and blinding people on the same streets, and now that street's been painted over. We can't be fooled. They're our enemies too. So thank you.
Yeah. Speaking from DC, which is Black excellence capital, probably along with Atlanta, it's insidious, the use of not only visible Black folks like Muriel Bowser, but just your regular came to DC to go to Howard, and is very proud to be part of a particular class of people, rank and file Black folks. Like, there's a very insidious way that the upper classes in the District of Columbia have made an entire identity out of this performance of Blackness that's rooted in just like a capitalist logic of being, not like the other Black folks, and how they obscure the everyday violence that African poor and working class people have faced in DC, as like, Black teens and youth are being harassed, and they're now talking about violence in Navy Yard and changing the curfew from 11 to 7 p.m. and all those kinds of things. And this whole myth of Chocolate City that DC has, in order to obscure the fact that most people can't even afford to live here anymore unless they're making a bunch of money. And how, as my comrade Sister Sheena said, they're pushing people out of DC into the surrounding counties. And the way that, the classes of DC, like Muriel Bowser, who's in her counter to Trump's Make DC Safe and Beautiful Act, was like, well, we also need more money for cops. It wasn't like maybe we shouldn't do this. It was, I think we should, and also you missed a few things. So we understand how the usage of these Black politicians, the CBC, BAP was agitating outside of the CBC gala, and they were walking by in their tacky dresses. It was very much the memes of the Dems with their ears plugged, like they didn't want to hear anything about it. And when we would say, like, the CBC is supporting XYZ violence on the continent, they'd be like, well, I'm not doing that. Yes, you are. You have paid however much money to sit at this table and rub elbows with some man that was on power for a few seasons in order to throw the rest of the African working class Black folks in DC under the bus, in order to support draconian crime laws, in order to say that you don't feel safe because you think those laws are for you, when they're actually for the white folks that are coming into DC. They don't care if you are there either. They only care that their place is safe and beautiful for the diplomats. So the role they've always played is one of projecting the outward appearance of betterment and uplift, so that we can all pretend that it's an individual issue that people can't afford rent in DC. And so that we can all pretend that if everyone just made better choices and went to a better HBCU, that they too could be rubbing elbows with Muriel Bowser and the other people at the CBC, when we know that these are structural issues that are designed specifically to keep the colonized African people in DC under the boot of the colonial classes and comforter classes.
Thank you for that, Bree. I want to move on to last
Can I
thought.
say something on this? Tay, you had your hand up. You put your hand down.
I can come back later. Go ahead, Nefa.
Okay, but I don't want to say that what this is an integral feature of neocolonialism. So, and how Bree said, neocolonialism is defined by having one of the features of it is all the outward trappings of independence. One of them being that you have a leader or whatever, you know, a president or something like that, or people representing you. But all the politics and economics are controlled by, you know, the former colonizer or the colonizer, and by outside. And so on the African continent, this class, the comprador class, takes one of the roles that answers the question is that they had our people for a while hyper focused on the African continent on get this dictator out, because they're failing the people, because they're applying neoliberal policies. And then, but the people are looking at that without looking at the puppeteer, looking at the puppet, not looking at the puppeteer. Our people have matured now, and that's why they're really in trouble, because when you look at the alliances of hell states and all these demonstrations in countries that are talking about get the French out, get the U.S., get AFRICOM, that means the people are advancing in the consciousness. And Nkrumah wrote a book called, and it was based on Lenin's book. It was Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. The last stage, which means we have to understand where the phase we're in, and the fact that if our people are seeing the compradors more clearly on the continent of Africa, and even in where we are, we have to take advantage. Then that means we're at a final stage that imperialism is trying to hold on to. It also, and this last part, it can seek to confuse our connection, Africans' connections on the continent to the U.S. And a perfect example to me was this thing with Ramaphosa coming here, and then there, you know, and how he was treated by Trump and all the compradors and everyone else, and this is why BAP also, Black Alliance for Peace, has taken the position not to exceptionalize Trump because of this very thing, where everyone looks to, you know, to empathize with and sympathize with Ramaphosa, who's coming because of how Trump treated him, and not even thinking about the fact that why would you come here and meet with our enemy? We're at war. What do you expect to gain? And then he's doing things like distancing himself from when they showed, Trump and them showed him, oh, this is a genocide is being committed against us. And they, you know, the news stories was, oh, he was ambushed by this information that Trump presented. He was, you know, how you get ambushed by that? By a country that is presiding over the most heinous and intensified genocides in Palestine. And South Africa is the country that brought them up against the International Criminal Court. That should have been the first thing he said to him. He shouldn't have been, you know, put off by that. But anyway, he does that, and then distances himself from the comments, because Trump and them were bringing up Malema and Julius Malema in South Africa and the EFF as, look, you know, this shows that you're against us or whatever. And he's, instead of him saying, you know, y'all are our enemy and you're doing all kinds, you know, outlining the things they've done to Africa and the world, he's like, no, Malema's not with us and all that. This is the compradors. He's a comprador, and all of the U.S. Compradors were sympathizing with Ramaphosa and talking about how he was treated, and not even looking at the hat in hand kowtowing that he was doing to Trump. That everybody said, well, you know. And so anyway, this is how this works, and how we need to be able to expose it.
Erica told me to put my hand back up. So I just want to raise 2 points and I'm done. I'll speak to the Blackness leadership in Northern Virginia. So there's a Northern Virginia Black Chamber of Commerce. And one of their sponsors or partners is Monumental. And Monumental is monumental in gentrification in DC. And it's really big in like Chinatown. There is a historic church that is on the chopping block right now because Monumental wants to throw up some more development. And I think it's funny that the Northern Virginia Black Chamber of Commerce partners with Monumental yet, and I wanted to bring this up earlier. In Northern Virginia, Black residents were 44% more likely to die before the age of 75 than their white counterparts. And in some jurisdictions such as Arlington County and Alexandria, Black populations were 116% and 117% more likely to die before the age of 75. So instead of investing in your community's health, the health disparities, addressing, poverty, shelter, people being hungry, they're investing and working alongside Monumental and other private equity to advance their own selves. I'm sure they are riding by in their nice cars and their nice big houses and, just saying if the Black community just did this, then all would be well. but the last thing I wanted to raise, I didn't get to talk about LeVar Stoney, but I'll come back another day. Was there is a Virginia Israeli Advisory Board. Please look into this. So the Virginia Israel Advisory Board is it's a relationship between Virginia, the state of Virginia, and Israel. Started in 1996. It is a government agency funded by taxpayer money, which allows Israeli businesses to kind of shop for land and space in Virginia and put down businesses, so like data centers, and then weapons manufacturing. Even there is a company that produces the safety glass. So the glass that they use in military vehicles is produced in Virginia. So I just wanted to draw some connections there.
Thank y'all for your comments. To add on to that, it's important to understand that as everybody has said, the Black mixed leadership class, their role is to oversee the continuation of our status as colonized people. We can see that quite clearly in Baltimore City. We understand that we have a large democratic influence, and most of these Democrats that are leading us are Africans. For example, we see with Ivan Bates. Ivan Bates in Baltimore City has continuously pushed for the lesson of youth rights. We see that in the youth reform bill, which pushes to arrest youth as young as 10 years old. We also see this demonization of the youth in order to justify the occupation of police, stating that youth are a danger to our society, a danger to our streets, even though in Baltimore City, youth are more likely to be victims of violence than perpetuators. They are more likely to be abused in prisons than to be the abuser. It's important to understand that this experience to their, demonization of parents of these youth, even though parents are forced to work 2 or 3 jobs and maybe have to come home late. We also see, specifically with Westmore had campaigned on being here for African Americans, stating things such as he understands the structural problems of Africans. And we saw recently he just had vetoed a bill for a study of reparations, saying that Africans are out of the situation. They don't need that. African needs to be, we are pushing for Africans to be entrepreneurs. And this is important to understand. This shows not only the capitalistic nature of the Black men's leadership class, but it also shows how they're in cahoots with pushing this narrative that that racism and what we see with slavery, this is no more. Our conditions we are going beyond our conditions. We also see a lot of money being shifted from what should be given to the public and the community, but being moved into private entities. We see this with Brandon Scott and his, this money being put into the harbor. We see that he is making it easier for gentrification to occur, with it making it easier for people to buy up houses in large swaths through the fixed vacant housing price plan, which tries to hide itself as something for the community, saying that a community members can buy a house for $1, even though we understand the extreme poverty in Baltimore City and it is near impossible for somebody with $0 in an income, which 1/3 of Baltimore City residents are facing these conditions, make it difficult for these to buy these houses. The Black men's leadership class is helping to speed up and perpetuate gentrification and to continue to keep us in these conditions. We see this with the budgeting. We understand that redlining and these other things, they have their issue with resources being taken away from our communities. So we see a Black men's leadership class overseeing and continuing and are implicit in these resources not making their way to our community, making their way into private hands, making their way into private investors. So not only do we see that, it's important to understand that this is quite clear to them, because they use the same talking points that we want to hear. We want to hear how we want what we need, and they push that idea, yet their actions do not go with what we need. So it's important to understand that our Black men's leadership class is intentionally and actively obscuring our conditions and misleading us. And there you go.
Thank you for that presence. Okay, so that leads us towards the end of our roundtable. I wanted to see if anybody had any closing thoughts to kind of summarize what we've been discussing here, anything that you weren't able to say that you feel is important to articulate. to really hit home that there is a war, an ideological war, but also quite literally a war happening here and across the world against Black working class folks. Any final words? Oh, Bree.
I have some final words. I think that our framing, which is always consistent about war, is important, because if we understand ourselves to be at war, then our objective should be very clear. War only ends in one way, and wars don't end via a handshake and a vote. So I think it makes it very clear what we're up against. When I talk of like more money for MPD and DC policing, the phrasing used was to increase morale of the DC police. So what would they need to increase their morale to do? And what would these new weapons embolden them to do? And how exactly are we supposed to act when we're hearing that language? I think that because we understand ourselves to be at war, we have to understand the stakes being that high. And I hope everybody comes away with this, with the understanding that strategic, organized action is needed to win against an enemy that is organized and strategic. And because they are out-resourced, that does not mean they're not out-peopled. We outnumber them, and we have to understand what the goal is so we can understand what our tactics would be.
Netfa.
Well, Bree gave me the segue, and basically mine was that we are winning. I mean, because the what's happening, what we see the enemy doing, are expressions of their desperation. They can't keep a lid on it anymore, and then they face a crisis of legitimacy. We used to say, and the legitimacy, when they face this crisis of legitimacy, it means that we can expand our ranks, and that we can use our numbers, and that we have to see that, we have to understand the advantages that we have. Kwame Ture used to say that the greatest strength that we have is the truth that we tell, talking about the essential nature of the battle of ideas and seeing people. And their greatest weakness are the lies that they tell. And we can't, they can tell all kind of things, but all you have to do is, drop one truth, one refutation, one rebuttal, and it grows our numbers, because people can start seeing things differently. And so they're on the ropes. And, I think we have to see that kind of thing. That's why we can see what we're happening in Africa, and then what's so important for this webinar, and the title of it is that our primary objective and goal should be, or one of the strategies should be, how do we make sure our people connect the continent with what we, not only the conditions, but also our liberation, our solution, our goals has to be inextricably understood as being one, the same enemy, the same goals.
Thank you, Sheena.
Michael Langley did such a huge favor by attacking the AES that people who wouldn't even consider themselves Pan-Africanists are talking about the Sahel. He exposed his role in the empire, and more people are starting to understand what his function is. The more work we do around educating people, politically educating people, that his role is Westmore's role, is Kamala Harris's role, was Colin Powell's role. All of these first Blacks and these titles and these specific roles, these people who were groomed to take these prominent positions in government, are working to make sure this empire, this white hegemonic state, keeps coasting, keeps extracting wealth, keeps exploiting, keeps suppressing the will of the people to fight for liberation. Anybody who can say that they are going to stand with the Negro in uniform, tearing down African people fighting for sovereignty, has made an enemy of so many Africans around the world that they have no choice but to stand firm with people whose names they just learned a few weeks ago, because he showed his hand and exposed that his goal is protecting the masses' house.
Hey.
From educator perspective, the youth are listening. Please work with the youth. If you have any spare time in your week, spend an hour, spend a couple of hours and work with youth. I'm still in contact with some of my former students, and I give driving lessons, I tutor. And when I'm working with them, I talk to them about their assignments. So one thing I learned researching for this panel is that there's a big connection between the Bahamas and Virginia, because it was like, all under the Virginia Company. That's not taught in schools, but outside of schools, we could be providing that education so that when they're in the school building and they hear the lies and the indoctrination, they can be like, oh, well, anyways, at my Saturday school, I learned this. And so I know that's not true. And they can continue to raise awareness. Now my dog getting loud at the end. But yeah, I just wanted to say the children are listening. Please, please, please connect with the youth in your life. Be the auntie, uncle, whatever, and just keep in contact. If you have, like I said, if you have spare time, go down to the schools and see if they need tutors. Just sit with the youth, laugh with them, learn what they're talking about. I don't know the language anymore. I think I stopped at like no cap. That's where I stopped. But speak to the kids. They'll teach us. Not you. Thank you.
Presence.
Yeah, real fast, just to, raise this up, we must understand that we are in a global struggle right now. The same way we see gangs being raised as the issue in Baltimore City is the same way we see gangs being raised in Haiti. And the same way we see a surge of federal troops coming to Haiti is the same reason why we see the surge of federal funding for weapons coming to Baltimore City. The same way they say that getting ready for tomorrow's threat in Africa, you justifying the reason for AFRICOM is the same reason why we see they're saying they're getting ready for the next threat in Baltimore City. That's why they need military weapons and HBCUs. So we must understand that when we have a victory in Baltimore City, it's a victory for Africa. When we have a victory for Africa, that's a victory for Baltimore City. So we must understand that these struggles are interconnected, and we must understand that we are part of this global struggle to end imperialism. And I yield there.
Thank you for that. Thank you to all of the panelists for taking your time and sharing your expertise with our audience of 134 attendees. I think at a certain point it was almost 150. To end, we just want to talk about a way that you can get involved directly tomorrow. So tomorrow, the Black Alliance for Peace and All African People's Revolutionary Party will be hosting African Liberation Day. Can y'all see it on my screen? Is it showing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's tomorrow in Baltimore. Erica also dropped this in the chat. So if you want to write this down, audience members, if you're in the DMV area to join us, like we've been saying, there are holes being poked in the empire. It is our chance and our responsibility to join together and to, as President said, gain clarity on the issue and on our campaigns to bring it down. So as we end, just again, want to say thank you to everyone. Okay. Thank you to everyone, and no compromise.
No
retreat.
No
Retreat.
compromise.
No retreat.
No retreat.
No compromise.
No retreat.
Okay, everybody. Have a great
Thank
Thursday.
you everyone for attending. And thank you, Billy, as well, for
Thank you.
interpreting.
Thank you.
Billy, the real MVP.
Thank you, Billy.
Peace, y'all.
Peace, y'all. Thank y'all for joining.